There is a project you have been working on for as long as you can remember. The project is you. You have been improving yourself, refining yourself, optimizing yourself, reading the books that promise to make you sharper, developing the habits that promise to make you stronger, cultivating the disciplines that promise to make you more, and at some point, so long ago that you cannot remember when, you accepted, without ever quite deciding to, that this was simply what serious adult life is. You did not question it. No one around you questioned it. Everyone you respect is doing the same project. The difference between successful people and unsuccessful people, you have been told 1,000 times, is that successful people work on themselves. And so you work on yourself. And you have been working on yourself for so long that the work has become invisible to you. It is just what you do. It is just who you are. And it is exhausting you in a way that you have not yet allowed yourself to name. Because, if you named it, you would have to admit something almost no one in modern life is allowed to admit, that the project of becoming a better version of yourself may be slowly destroying you, and that the better version you have been chasing for 20 years was never going to arrive. Not because you did not work hard enough, but because the entire structure of the project was built on a lie. The lie is so old and so woven into modern life that you have to look at it carefully before you can see it. The lie is this, that you are a project, that your worth is something you build, that the version of yourself who matters lives somewhere in the future, on the other side of enough work, enough optimization, enough becoming, and that the present version of you, the one reading this right now, is essentially a draft, a rough copy, a temporary self that exists primarily to be replaced by the finished one. This is the central faith of modern life, and almost no one ever examines it. Examine it now. Notice that the entire architecture of your inner life depends on this assumption. When you feel restless, you assume it is because you have not become enough yet. When you feel inadequate, you assume the cure is more becoming. When you feel exhausted, you assume the answer is to optimize the exhaustion away. At no point in this entire architecture does it occur to you to ask whether the becoming itself might be the problem. But here is what should disturb you. The better version of yourself that you have been working toward for 20 years will not arrive. Not because you are failing. You are not failing. You have probably already become, by external measures, a better man than you were 10 years ago. You are more disciplined, more knowledgeable, more capable, more responsible. By every metric you set for yourself, you have improved. And yet, the better self has not arrived. Because the better self is not a destination. It is the receding horizon of a journey that has no end. Every version of you that you become becomes the new starting point. And a new better self appears on the horizon, further out, requiring more work, more becoming. And you have spent your entire adult life walking toward a horizon that walks away from you at exactly the same speed you walk toward it. This is not a flaw in your particular project. This is the structure of the project itself. Psychology has actually demonstrated this with research, that almost no one in the self-improvement industry wants you to read. There is a phenomenon called the hedonic treadmill, or hedonic adaptation, and it is one of the most consistent findings in the entire psychology of well-being. The basic finding is this: human beings adapt to almost everything, to good things, to bad things, to achievements, to losses. Within months, sometimes within weeks, the new circumstance becomes the new baseline, and the person returns to roughly the same level of well-being they had before. Lottery winners are not significantly happier than the general population 18 months after winning. People who experience serious injury return, over time, to levels of life satisfaction much closer to their original than anyone predicts. and the man who works for years to achieve a specific position, a specific income, a specific level of recognition, almost universally reports, once he arrives, that the arrival did not feel the way he expected it to feel. This is the structural reason your better self will not arrive. You cannot become happy by changing your circumstances, not even your inner circumstances, because the part of you that registers your circumstances adapts to whatever you change and reaches for the next thing and the next. And the chase itself is what produces the dissatisfaction, not the absence of the thing you are chasing. But there is something deeper than the hedonic treadmill, something the research has not quite been able to name, but that Viktor Frankl came closest to seeing. Frankl observed that human beings do not actually need to be optimized. What they need is to be oriented. They need a why, a meaning that is larger than themselves. And, given that meaning, they can endure almost anything, including their own unoptimized condition. Without it, even the most optimized life feels hollow. The reason the better self will not arrive is that the better self is the wrong destination. The soul is not asking to be improved. The soul is asking to be anchored to something it can serve, something it can love, something that gives it a reason to wake up that has nothing to do with becoming. Psychology can show you this. It can document the treadmill, it can point at the missing meaning, but it cannot tell you what meaning is large enough to actually anchor a human life. For that, we have to go to a thinker who saw the entire self-improvement project from outside, 1,500 years before the self-improvement industry was invented. Augustine spent the first half of his life doing exactly what you are doing. He was extraordinarily ambitious. He was a rising intellectual in the Roman Empire, a brilliant rhetorician, a man whose career trajectory was the ancient equivalent of a Silicon Valley founder. He optimized his speaking, his reading, his social relationships, his philosophy. He assembled the best version of himself that 4th century Roman culture could produce. And by the time he was in his early 30s, he had largely arrived. By external measures, he had become the better self he had been chasing since he was a boy. And he was miserable. He writes about this in the Confessions with a precision that has not been surpassed in 15 centuries. He describes the moment when, having achieved everything he had been working toward, he understood that achievement itself had not given him what he was looking for, that the entire project of self-improvement, even when it succeeded, even when it produced a better version of him, had not delivered the thing his soul had actually been hungry for. And then he writes the sentence that names what was happening to him and what is happening to you. He says to God, "You have made us for yourself, and our heart is restless until it rests in you." Read that slowly, because Augustine is making a metaphysical claim, not a sentimental one. He is saying that the human heart was built with a specific shape, a shape that only one thing can fill, and that until that thing fills it, the heart will continue to reach. It will continue to chase. It will continue to try to fill its emptiness by becoming more. And none of the becoming will work. Not because the heart is broken, but because the heart was designed to find rest in a particular place. And self-improvement was never that place. The lie of the better you, Augustine would say, is the lie that you are reaching for something the soul actually wants. You are not reaching for a better version of yourself. You only think you are. What your soul is actually reaching for is a place to rest that is not yourself, a foundation that is not your own performance, a worth that does not depend on the next version arriving. And as long as you mistake that hunger for the hunger to become more, you will keep working and keep arriving and keep finding that the arrival is empty because you are trying to satisfy a metaphysical thirst with a project of self-construction. And no project of self-construction has ever been large enough to fill the place the soul was made for. Philosophy can take you this far. It can name the misdirection. It can show you what you are actually reaching for. But philosophy cannot give it to you. For that, we have to go to one place. A place that does not promise to make you better. A place that offers something more radical than improvement. There is something at the center of the Christian gospel that the self-improvement world cannot tolerate. And that is precisely why the gospel is what your exhausted soul has been looking for. The gospel does not offer you a better version of yourself. It offers you, in place of the project of becoming, a new identity that is given to you, not built by you, a worth that is settled, not constructed, a foundation that does not depend on your next achievement. This is what the New Testament means by terms that have become so familiar they have lost their force. Terms like new creation, like adoption, like being known. These are not motivational phrases. They are precise descriptions of a fundamentally different relationship to the self. The new creation is not an improved version of the old you. It is a different category of being, one that is no longer organized around the project of self-construction, one that has, at its center, an identity received from outside the self, an identity that was given before you produced anything, and that cannot be revoked by anything you fail to produce after. Imagine, for a moment, what happens to the project of self-improvement when this lands, not as a slogan, but as something you actually believe. You do not stop growing, but the growth changes character entirely. You no longer grow in order to become enough. You grow because you are already enough, and growth is now an expression of that, not a desperate attempt to earn it. You no longer optimize yourself to justify your existence. You take care of yourself the way a beloved son takes care of a gift he was given, with gratitude rather than fear. The treadmill stops, not because you have arrived at the better self. You never will. But because you have stepped off the treadmill entirely and onto ground that does not move under your feet. And from that ground, you can finally do real work. Not the desperate work of becoming someone, but the slow work of being someone, the someone you already are, in the only court whose verdict matters. This is what Christ meant when he said, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. And take my yoke upon you, for my yoke is easy, and my burden is light." The burden is light, because it is no longer the burden of justifying yourself. It is the burden of a son who has already been justified, and from that justification, he can act with everything he has. But he is no longer being eaten by the action, because the action is no longer the source of his worth. His worth is the source of the action. The lie of the better you was the belief that you had to build the self that mattered. The truth of the gospel is that the self that matters was given to you, freely, before you built anything. And the moment you can rest in that, the project is finally over. So what do you do with this? Starting today, the lie of self-improvement is so woven into how you think that you cannot dismantle it with one decision. It will keep operating in you for years, even after you understand what it is. So the practice this week is small and aimed at the texture of your daily thinking. Each time, this week, you catch yourself in the language of self-improvement, thinking about how you are going to become more disciplined, more productive, more enlightened, more spiritual, more anything. I want you to interrupt the thought with a single question. Ask yourself, quietly, am I building or am I receiving? That is all. Am I building or am I receiving? You are not going to stop building. You should not stop building. The practice is not to abandon effort. The practice is to notice in the moment the place from which the effort is coming. When the effort comes from building, from the project of becoming someone who is finally enough, let the question loosen your grip on it. Let yourself remember that the someone has already been given to you. When the effort comes from receiving, from a worth already settled, from a foundation already laid. Let yourself rest in it, and let the work that flows from that resting be the work you actually do. The question seems small. It is small. But over months of asking it, the texture of your inner life begins to shift. You start to feel the difference between the two kinds of effort. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the second kind begins to take over from the first. You will not be a different man tomorrow. The project will still be running when you wake up. The treadmill will still be there, and the better version of yourself will still be on the horizon, walking away. But each time you ask the question, am I building or am I receiving? You will be putting one more stone on the road that leads somewhere the project could never take you to, a self that does not have to be built, because it has already been given, and the giving was settled. Before you did a single thing,